Okay, so hello everyone again, and welcome back from your break. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Narve, as I mentioned in the previous session, and I'll be the moderator of this session. And we're glad to have you here with us, and appreciate you taking the time to be here. And before we begin, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items to help ensure that we have a smooth session. So this session is being recorded, and if you don't want to be seen in the recordings, feel free to turn off your webcam throughout the session, and please keep your microphones muted unless you're invited to speak. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat anytime, and you can also share your comments and ideas. We'll address your questions at the end of the session. And the closed caption feature is enabled, so you can activate it by clicking on the Show Captions or CC Live Transcript button in the bottom toolbar. If not visible, you can just click More to find it. So now it's now my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Jennifer Perez Lara, Ashley Flores, and Kristie Barlas from San Jose State University. And the title of their session is Culture and You, and Multidisciplinary Conversation on Everyday Cultural Research Practices. We are very excited to have you here as our presenters. So the floor is yours. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. Once again, our presentation title is Culture and You, a multidisciplinary conversation on everyday cultural research practices. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So we wanted to start off the presentation with some quick introductions, as we're representing an entire team of researchers from San Jose State University. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Villagran, as she couldn't be here today with us, but she's the associate professor spearheading this project, and the rest of us are going to be facilitating today's discussion. Once again, my name is Jennifer, and I am a library and information science graduate student at San Jose State, and I'm currently working as a graduate research assistant under Dr. Villagran and as a library technician at Miracosta Community College. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to my colleague, Ashley, so she can go ahead and introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Flores, and I am a current library and information science graduate student at San Jose State University, working under Dr. Villagran as a student assistant in support of the CCRLIS project, primarily supporting the development of a podcast that focuses on conversations surrounding culture and research. And I'm also working as a messenger clerk within the LAPL library system. And then I can pass it off to Kristie.
My name's Kristie. So I'm a San Jose State alumni with my MLIS. I graduated in December. I was a graduate research assistant for Dr. Villagran for the phase one of the CCRLIS project, which is what we're all working on. And she corralled me into working on a open access course that we are developing, and I am the instructional designer for that course. Thank you all for being here.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've been alluding, like Kristie mentioned, to the CCRLIS project. So we wanted to give a quick overview of this project that we've all been contributing to, right? So CCRLIS stands for Culturally Competent Research in Library and Information Science. So this project aims to develop evidence-based interventions to improve cultural competence in library and information science research, particularly by applying cultural competence, cultural intelligence, and cultural humility to research team development and the research process. So under the guidance of Dr. Villagran, this project has been steadily evolving and is currently divided into three distinct phases. Research started in 2025 with phase one, with library and information science professionals as our test subjects. And then it became a sabbatical project in 2026, which is where we're currently at, phase two. And then finally, there's potential for a 2027 continuation, which would be phase three. As we're working on multiple deliverables, kind of like Kristie and Ashley mentioned, an open access course, a podcast, some scholarly text, a workbook at some point. So that's the project so far. I'm going to go ahead and transition into the learning objectives for today's discussion. So let's get started with that. So after today's conversation, we hope that you all take away at least one of today's key learning objectives. These are participants will be able to identify key cultural terms such as cultural competence, cultural humility, and cultural intelligence, and their differences. Number two, participants will be able to share their experiences with cultural competence, cultural intelligence, cultural humility, and if applicable, describe how they have implemented relevant practices in their everyday work across disciplines. Number three, participants will be able to discuss and identify new cultural research practices to implement in their day-to-day work. Okay, so that's enough from me for now. I'm going to hand over the next section of the presentation to Kristie. But before we get started, we wanted to conduct a quick, just a quick poll, I guess, to gauge our audience's familiarity with the cultural terms that we're about to cover. So you guys have heard us mention them already: cultural competence, cultural intelligence, cultural humility. So if you could please drop a reaction or in the chat if you guys are familiar with these topics or if you've heard them before. If you've heard them before, feel free to drop a thumbs up. If you haven't heard them before, use any other emoji that you can that you have access to. So we just want to see how many of you guys are familiar with these terms. So far we are seeing a couple thumbs up, so that's really good. Totally okay if you haven't heard of these terms before. That's the purpose of today's discussion. We are going to go over them, but we just wanted to see how familiar you guys are. Okay, so I will go ahead and hand it off to Kristie.
Thanks, Jenny. And like Jenny said, learning these cultural terms, we're not going to give you a whole 45-minute lecture and make sure that you know every aspect of these terms, but we just wanted a sense, and we'll give a broad definition of each of them and show how they connect to each other. Next slide, please. So we'll start with cultural competence, which is the most popular term, although cultural humility has become more popular in recent years. Cultural competence has been defined as the ability to recognize the significance of culture in one's own life. And by culture, I mean culture beyond race and ethnicity. We're also thinking about cultures of physical and non-physical disabilities, age, gender identity, sexual orientation. So it's a very broad definition of culture that we're considering here. The significance of culture in one's own life and in the lives of others, to come to know and respect the diverse cultural backgrounds and characteristics through interaction with individuals from diverse linguistic, cultural, and socioeconomic groups, and to fully integrate the culture of diverse groups into services, work, and institutions in order to enhance the lives of those being served by the library profession and those engaged in service. This definition was created by a library professional and researcher, Patricia Overall, who adapted the framework of cultural competence for library and information science. That's why we're using this definition. But there are a lot of other disciplines that have used cultural competence as well, such as international business, psychology, and the medical and healthcare field. Thank you, Jenny. Cultural intelligence is interesting because while cultural competence came as a framework before cultural intelligence became more granular. It focused on 4 distinct factors of how to achieve successful cultural interactions with other people that are, respectful, show cultural appreciation, and the 4 factors I'll go into in a visual graphic that we have in a later slide, but they they essentially have the same goal, but they go about it in different ways. Cultural humility is interesting because it's a more recent framework, and the emphasis focuses on a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about other cultures, but one starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. So there's an emphasis on not just one cultural identity, but the intersection of cultural identities. Cultural humility also brings in this perspective of positionality, and so there's an emphasis on not looking at just the interpersonal communication, but where the context lies. What is the culture of organization or the institution or procedures as well? Next slide. So this is an infographic that I helped create, and it's still in the works. But I'll start off with cultural intelligence because this is where we become very focused on observable skills. There are 4 factors to cultural intelligence: cognitive, which is knowledge, facts that you know, understanding of cultural values, language, or communication behaviors. Metacognitive is that self-reflection piece and also the effort in thinking about your own personal biases and cultural biases. Motivation is an interesting factor because it focuses on the authenticity of your motivation, whether that is intrinsic or whether that is extrinsic. Is it a really personal value that you have, or is it really for the success of your job? And it can be both. And then there's behavioral. How are you approaching communication and adapting nonverbal behaviors and the words that you use or the way that you are trying to connect with people? Branching out a little bit further, cultural competence still incorporates those skills, but there's also a sense of awareness. You're not just looking at individual questions, but you're able to focus a little bit broader, say on the conversations or in different circumstances, adapting and building up those skills and your approach. And then the broadest is, I think, cultural humility, where there's really an emphasis of intention. It's less focused on observable behaviors or skills, but there's an intention and a desire to evaluate and continue to learn, commit to lifelong learning, having that respect and appreciation for different cultures and addressing power imbalances as the starting point, not necessarily any kind of destination. And I do want to bring up cultural competence also emphasizes a lifelong commitment to practice. That's often forgot about, but it's throughout all of these frameworks. And now I'll turn it back over to Jenny to start our discussion.
Awesome. Okay. So how's everyone doing so far? How are we feeling? How do our definitions, did they make sense? Give me a thumbs up if so far you're feeling okay. Or if you have any questions, now's a good time to drop them in the chat as well.
It's also a lot, so please feel free to ask questions or say, I'm confused.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So we are going to get started on the discussion section of our presentation. So once again, feel free to interrupt us if any comments or questions arise. You can unmute or you can drop them in the chat as well. But let's go ahead and get started. So this is a quick overview of the topics that we're going to be going over today. So we split it up into 3 sections. We're going to start with introductions. We want to hear from you, and then we're going to transition into cultural terms, which is what we just went over, and then research practices, if we have time. So we're going to be using a Padlet discussion board as another tool to enhance the conversation and to allow those who may be watching the recording later to still be able to participate. So please go ahead and scan the QR code that you're seeing on your screen, or click the link that we're going to be dropping in the chat momentarily, so you can access the Padlet discussion board. So give me one quick second. I'll drop that link in the chat for you all. And then we won't be using it for the first topic, so just keep those Padlet boards handy. And then we will go ahead and use them for topics 2 and 3. So let me go ahead and drop this in the chat. Make it easier. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with topic number 1. So for this discussion, like I said, you won't need the Padlet board, but I'll go ahead and hand it over to my colleague Ashley to lead this section of the discussion.
Thank you, Jenny. So now on to our first discussion topic, introductions. So starting off our discussion, we ask that everyone share their name and their current role or area of discipline just to see the breadth of expertise that we have here present today. In the interest of time, there are a lot of people, so we ask that you share your introductions in the Zoom chat. I can give you some time to do that.
In Padlet or Zoom? Sorry.
In the Zoom chat.
Okay.
Awesome. We're seeing a lot of faculty members, so that's amazing.
Yeah, like Jenny said, lots of faculty members in a lot of different areas of expertise, so that's great to see. So while those are rolling in, thank you for all the introductions that have been present so far. And with those introductions, thank you for sharing again. We can move on to the next slide. So, continuing on, we wanted to initiate our conversation of cultural competence, intelligence, and humility with a reflection exercise to get in the mindset of understanding how our own cultures may affect our professional practices. So, I'd like you all to take a moment to reflect on your own culture and upbringing and identify any identities that you feel, of course, comfortable sharing with the group. Gonna give you a moment to reflect. Now, with these identities in mind, how do you believe that these identities may have impacted your trajectory in academia? And if anyone would like to share their response on the microphone, I'd ask that you please raise your hand so we can have a smooth transition into speakers. But also feel free to share your response in the Zoom chat as well. And I can go ahead and read those if you feel more comfortable sharing.
While we wait for those discussion or those responses to come in, we can also share a little bit more about our identities. In the meantime, we have a couple minutes. So did you want to start, Ashley, or I can start?
Yeah, I can start. So for me personally, I think one of the most impactful facets of my personal cultural identity is my Filipino American heritage. And it was actually joining Filipino organizations during my time as an undergraduate student at UCLA that introduced me to the field of Asian American studies and ethnic studies, which I eventually did achieve my bachelor's degree in. And it was actually through Asian American studies that I really delved into the importance of community organizing and community-centered resources. And that eventually led me to pursuing librarianship, specifically public librarianship, which is very community-centered. I hopefully aim to support my local communities through information resources and library services.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Ashley. We do have one response so far. So someone mentioned that they're a first-gen college graduate, and I completely relate to that identity as well. I was also a first-gen college graduate and a first-gen graduate student as well. So no one in my family has ever made it this far in education. So it's definitely something that impacts my trajectory and kind of how I navigate spaces. You know, I read about it a lot in our work so far, especially in our graduate program. So definitely a great identity that does impact a lot. Would anyone like to share on the microphone? Or is everyone still typing their responses?
We do have another chat response by Arcelis. Pardon me if I mispronounce that. They also said that they are first gen to elementary school. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, honestly, like the identity of being a first generation anything, you're kind of setting a precedent for your own community and your own expertise because you don't really have anybody to guide you. So a lot of it is a lot of firsts that you're experiencing. So thank you for sharing that. So with that, we can move on to our next discussion topic.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hand this section off to Kristie in just one moment, but we did want to do a quick demo of the Padlet board in case anyone is familiar. So we're gonna do that really quickly. Give me 1 second. We're gonna switch the screen share over to the Padlet board. And so here we go. Okay. So let me exit out of my sharing. So this is what the Padlet board looks like. So since we do have a bit of longer questions to kind of engage conversation, we weren't able to have you guys post under each topic. So what we decided is that we would like all of our participants to comment their responses to each question. So you will see all the questions that we have here for the cultural terms topic, and then underneath for topic number 3, these are all the questions that we have for the research teams topic. We may not get to all of them, or don't feel obligated that you have to answer each aspect of the question. If you only, feel comfortable with answering one question or part of the question, feel free. We're willing to hear. We just want to hear from everybody. So um, all your responses will also be anonymous unless you sign into the Padlet. But we will we would like to, if you are comfortable sharing your name, feel free, but if not, it'll be completely anonymous. And this goes for those watching the recording as well. You can go ahead, it'll still be up and you can still comment your responses afterwards, after the presentation's over. So let me go ahead and transition back to our slides, and then I will hand it over to Kristie. And if in the meanwhile any questions come up relating to the Padlet or you're having any trouble, feel free to drop them in the chat. So go ahead, Kristie.
Thanks, Jenny. You can go to the next slide. So the first question that we have is, and we kind of gauged if you have heard of any of these cultural frameworks before, but we would love to know where you heard them. Was it in your own research? Did you hear about it with like a training or in your professional career? Did you learn about it in school? Whenever that was, we won't ask when. But we would love to hear where you heard that. And again, you can answer that in the Padlet itself. Jenny, Ashley, and I will be looking at the Padlet as well for answers. But if you want to keep your answer contained here in the Zoom and not living forever on the Padlet, that's totally fine. You can also raise your hand and unmute yourself as well. For me, I could just share my experience. I learned it from Dr. Villagran. I literally took her class on cultural competence for library and information professionals, and that's where I learned to also think more about culture beyond race and ethnicity, and to think about, oh wow, there are disciplines that kind of have cultural norms. There's a way that they really value quantitative knowledge and they speak in certain ways, and there's an understanding there. So it really opened my eyes to what culture could be like and approach to having respect for other cultures, how I can think about that and how I consider culture in general, also in my assignments. It looks like we have one response. I was part of a book club in academia where I learned a number of these terms. I was also part of a free online training that exposed me to many frameworks. Oh, that's great. So it sounds like there was opportunity for discussion as well, where you could learn from each other. I feel like that's honestly one of the best ways to learn about cultural approaches, because I feel like a lot of people have informal ways where they think about these frameworks, and maybe it's not to the letter of what the framework says to do, but there's a lot of considerations and ways that we're naturally thinking about, how do I make this more inclusive? How do I make this more accessible and more welcoming to people from diverse cultures? Someone else said, in high school on the interscholastic debate team. Oh, wow, that's great. I wish I learned this in high school, honestly, because that would have changed my perspective about culture and how I approach assignments too. I took a culturally responsive teaching class. That's awesome. I feel like, especially with curriculum, there's a lot of areas where you can think about diversity and positionality and equity. But it's also interesting to think about, or at least with this project, the focus CCRLIS project is focused on research, but also team collaboration and how cultures can be respected and considered and valued in research processes. Thank you for those answers. We really appreciate it. If you haven't heard of these cultural frameworks before, was there a time in your work where you maybe applied an approach that's an example from one of these frameworks? Were you really thinking about, say, self-reflection? Maybe you were talking with somebody from a different culture and you thought, well, they talk very differently from me and I don't quite understand it, but I don't think it's personality. I think it could be something else. How did it go? Did you change your approach? Do you think it would have been helpful to have a guiding framework, maybe a list of considerations or steps that you could take?
Can I speak? Is it
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So, see, this is the part where I'm kind of, I'm in a little bit of dilemma. I was the one who wrote that I took a culturally responsive teaching class.
Oh, great.
So and I teach sciences, so I was trying to figure out like how I can kind of be more mindful, like you said, how to integrate and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But some parts of it was a little interesting because parts of that class was focused on and understandingly, right? So you don't want to put your student on the spotlight, and you want to make sure that you don't make them uncomfortable. So then it comes into this like really gray area. Obviously, none of us are like psychopaths. We're not going to just put the student on the spot and have them be really, really uncomfortable in the classroom. But at the same time, uh, people like myself, for example, I came here when I was 25 and putting forward my cultural background and talking about like our cultural food, our cultural this and that with other people was a way to connect with them, if that makes sense. So now there's this, oh, that is offensive. This is offensive. And you said this and that's completely offensive kind of thing creeping in somehow. And then
Mm.
it is harder now for people to make that a segue to like if I see someone who looks like me, I should be able to go and say, "Oh, hi, are you from that country?" Like I've been asked a lot, for example, if I was like this or that, from this country or that country. For some reason, the culture now, the teaching culture, the college culture seems to be making that oh, you shouldn't point blank ask that person if they are, I don't know, from Mexico, let's say, or from Italy, whatnot, because now that's offensive. And I
Mm.
think there's a really fine line in like making clear that because now the students take those classes as well, right? We take them as teachers, but they are also told that, oh, nobody should ask you where you're from, right?
Mm.
But that's the beauty of things, like to connect with people, especially like face-to-face interaction with people. If I have a student, for example, I'm from Turkey. If I have a student from those necks of woods in my class, then it's a great opportunity for me to be able to kind of say, oh my, you guys, have dolmales and we have dolma. It's the same thing. It's amazing. Talk about it a little bit. But now it is kind of be like, I don't know if I should even bring it up. It brings the energy down so much too, in my opinion. So that
Mhm.
also is like for research, I'm sure a lot of people feel kind of like, okay, what do I do now? What should I say in that gray area?
Yeah. And I think especially not to get, too political, but like the state of everything in the United States right now, there is a lot of, there are very valid reasons to fear having very open discussions about diversity, inclusivity, cultural inclusivity. And so I I completely understand where you're coming from because there is this sense of how do we create a welcoming and safe space where people can really share the richness of cultural identities, and how do we prevent it from being misinterpreted? I don't feel like there's a perfect answer, unfortunately. I think the hope would be that there are some ways to maybe provide opportunities for anonymous sharing, or to share personal things like background or personal experiences with culture to help create that safety net so they aren't called out specifically. But there's only so much you can do in so many different circumstances. So I completely understand um, where the struggle is. And I
It
think for
depends on
this,
the student. Like,
Mhm,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's okay.
One, you could say the same thing, for example, to two different students, and one of them could take it to like, oh my gosh, this was so offensive, because that's what the
Right.
other narrative is, right? They are being told that nobody should ask you this.
Mhm.
So, and then and also like, what's wrong if I ask you if you're Mexican or if you're Italian, right? Nobody clarifies that. It's just a don't ask me, that's offensive. But nobody goes down to the bottom of it. Like, why is it offensive to you to begin with? If I instead, I've been called Mexican a lot. And if I get offended by that, that's on me. Like it's you know what I mean? Like, why would anyone? But that kind of, I think that kind of narrative towards to students somehow encourages them. You can't ask me that. That's like
Right. Like
abusive.
avoiding the conversation completely rather than saying, I'm really curious. I'd really like to know, because then I can relate it like, oh, you remind me of somebody that I know,
Yeah.
versus it being oh, I'm making a presumption about you based off of the way that you look. But framing that conversation can be really tricky for sure. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very real struggle that needs to be considered in research for this project, but also in general, especially with students where maybe the culture isn't open to talking about personal experiences, or there's the interpretation, and then they're being told, like you said, by classes, well, you shouldn't have the conversation at all. But that doesn't really help reach a point of understanding. It builds up walls. It looks like in the chat we also have a message. I was first introduced to cultural competence during my graduate studies in educational leadership with emphasis on equity and social justice at SF San Jose State University. Applied this framework in practice by supporting the creation of a mural at my previous institution. That's very cool. The project was intentionally designed to reflect the diverse cultural identities of our student body and to strengthen students' sense of belonging across communities. That's beautiful. That sounds like an amazing project, especially with representation. Even just having that can be so impactful to students who just casually walking by. I'm also Filipino American, and not seeing like Filipino Americans in media, like just seeing one, it's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's great to see. It's just a small bit. And in curriculum, if I see research from another country, I become instantly more interested because they're not as highlighted in scholarship, unfortunately. Thank you for your answers, and thank you for the discussion. I think at this point we'll move on to the next question. In your current work, can you think of an example where you're implementing these concepts? We already have one about beautiful mural, and also considerations about what it's like creating discussion around cultural identities and making it safe and welcoming. if you can't think of an example, is there an area where you would like to try implementing an approach from these cultural frameworks? And again, this could be a very informal approach, diversifying literature. Oh, yes, Merv, would you like to go ahead?
Oh yeah, so I took a class at UC Berkeley Extension before getting my MA degree. So it was the cross-cultural communication class, and there it was really great because I had to just learn more about know more about my classmates, and I'm also from Turkey, so it's like so they asked me questions because they want to know me more because it was kind of interesting for them. So what I do in my class, like I teach at a community college, so I teach ESL. So I ask my students to present on their cultural like identities and their like traditions in their culture, even if they come from the same country, even if they have like say they have the same cultures, they still present different things because there might be like some subcultures or they do things differently even if they live in the same country. So, and I also like emphasize it's great because we are learning from each other, and even if you're from the same country, now you'll learn different things because different regions in a country, like they apply different things, maybe like traditions or food, or even there's dialect. I mean, I'm thinking of my country as well. So this is what I do in my class. So I just want to give this example. Maybe it's not super related to the cultural like frameworks, like theoretically, but that's what I do in my class. So I just wanted to share.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like one thing that I think about a lot is like the culture of academia and like framework and research and how it can feel very, oh, I need to apply this to the letter. Every single step, it needs to be a very formal process. And I think in practice, the process can be as simple as inviting those conversations in, like you're doing for your class, to help show that even people from the same culture, there's differences there, there's diversity there, and there's uniqueness, and people can learn different things from each other, even if they're from the same culture. Um, no, I think that's a beautiful example. Thanks for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share an example? And again, you're welcome to share either here in the chat or on the Padlet. I just dropped the link in there as well.
Okay, one other, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
James.
Yeah, one other example is in my computer literacy class where the students had to learn PowerPoint and Word and Excel. One of the assignments that was very popular for showing cultural competence was asking the students to do research on music and present it in the PowerPoints. But the kind of music they presented was up to them. Could be symphony, opera, jazz, hip hop, could be banta, salsa.
That's great.
And so what turned out to be the most popular ones was when Latino students would research Latino music. How about that? And then they would exceed it was only meant to be a PowerPoint presentation. So they were told not to do extensive research and details. Go to the internet, find the information, use whatever you need to do search, get images. The emphasis was on the technology part, getting the content in the PowerPoint and then presenting it. Those last two parts, using the technology, setting up the technology, and talking, as opposed to spending a whole bunch of time trying to rigorously analyze the music and all that. But anyway, they were encouraged simultaneously to bring in the culture and the musical impact and the history uh, if they wanted to, and or emphasize the personalities. So they could just talk about personalities because there's plenty of personalities that are popular, including Beyonce, and some of the more popular names are like that, and Rihanna or whatever, or the Cuban music was really popular, Cuban stars. But one of the most unique, from my point of view, was this guy from India, East India. He brought out some history that I never heard of, being, a mainstream California American. I never heard of all this music culture. He went back 3 centuries of East Indian music and described it. I won't try to recap it. But anyway, it also made the class more interesting and got the students involved in the main part of the course, which was using PowerPoint, present the material, and then using it to learn and explore the creative part of it, but thinking of it as a tool.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a great example. I love that a lot. Um, I'll say a little bit. I want to be conscious of time, but thank you for that example. I feel like that touches on a big part of the CCRLIS project, which is seeing people as cultural experts, learning from them, from what they already know, their life experiences, and giving value to that and letting them bring themselves either into their assignments or to their team collaborations and into their work. That's a huge reason why Dr. Villagran wants to create this project and really expand it into different areas, especially of librarianship and hopefully into other fields as well. But since we have less than 5 minutes, thank you all for the just wonderful discussion. We really appreciate all of your insights and your willingness to share your experiences. I'm going to turn this over to Jenny and she'll give us a wrap up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for your examples. They were really insightful. Especially, I really like James's example because like music is such a big part of so many cultural identities. And I would have been in the same boat as well. Like growing up, I didn't get all the references that, maybe like, tr that is traditionally like prevalent in American culture. So like an assignment like that would have been amazing. So, and that's also a great example of like how to incorporate cultural identities in the classroom while also being respective of everyone and just, having that safe space, kind of like Kristie mentioned. So, in the interest of time, we are going to skip the last section, but that's totally okay. Feel free, the Padlet will be up and we still are not sure, but it will be up for a definite amount of time. So if you didn't get a chance to today, or we didn't touch on a question that maybe you were interested in, feel free to drop it in the Padlet after this presentation or after the conference is over. So let me skip forward a bit. So, but I mean, really quickly, while we wrap up, if anyone has any examples relating to like research or anything like that, we touched up on it a little bit. But definitely, it doesn't have to be specific in that like research, like the traditional sense. Like if there's any aspect of you conducting research for your class or for your curriculum, we'd love to hear any type of examples that you may have. So, our key takeaways for this conversation, we wanted to emphasize that the cultural competence is a cyclical process rather than a linear one. So it's not really a finish line where you reach a certain point and don't look back. Like we mentioned, it should incorporate reflection, and it should be something that we're constantly working towards. So definitely like the examples that were mentioned in the Padlet and in the chat, trainings are a great way to keep doing that, to keep refreshing. Having these conversations is another great way. And, everyone here is already doing that by joining this discussion section and by joining this conference centered on equity. So we definitely want to highlight that. Another takeaway that we want to emphasize is that these concepts should be a natural active process. So it shouldn't be like a check mark that you mark off as a precautionary measure or anything like that. And this might be difficult at first. We aren't expecting you guys to be experts, but with practice, and like we said, like joining these conversations, doing all this professional development, it'll become easier and your habits and in your workflows, especially as faculty. Um, so now we want to hear from you, one last in the minute that we have. So if anyone has a key takeaway, drop it in the chat, drop it in the Padlet. We'd love to hear from you. And then feel free to scan the QR code if you want to access it again or if you missed it the first time. And like I said, you can always contribute later. And for those who are also watching the recording. Here are references. I believe the slides will be available after the presentation. So if you're more interested in kind of the works that we cited, they are related to library and information science, but there's also other disciplines that focus on these topics. So if anyone's interested in that. And then finally, if anyone's interested in CCRLIS and its progress, please join our interest list. You can go ahead and scan that QR code. If you had any feedback for us as well from this presentation, feel free to drop it in the comment section on that form. But thank you so much for joining us. We are at time. And then, yeah, I'll hand it back to Merv. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, Kristie, and Ashley for your insightful presentation and, talking about cultural competence and the cultural framework. It was great. And thank you, everyone, for all your participation. And yeah, thank you, just, Jennifer, Kristie, and Ashley for sharing their, time and your expertise with us. And also, of course, thank you, Dr. Villagran. I know he's not here, but still, I would like to thank him as well. So we will be meeting in this room again. So our next session is at 12 p.m. And the title of the next session is Equity in Motion, Pedagogy, Advocacy, and Practice in Online Learning. We hope we hope to see you again in the next session. So thank you so much again, everyone, for your participation, for sharing your comments, ideas in the chat, and just, unmuting yourselves and just to participate in this session. Thank you, everybody. And I'll stop recording.